Hey guys, tonight, we step into the quietly heroic world of ink stains, wool shortages, and the tireless men who kept Napoleon's armies slightly less barefoot. You've heard the stories of conquest cannons, cavalry, and dramatic music swelling in the background, but you probably haven't heard about the overworked clerk who accidentally sent 8,000 socks to the wrong regiment, or the Parisian office worker who built an entire career calculating left foot versus right foot wear rates. And you've just been assigned to join them. You won't be riding into battle. You won't be drafting treaties. You'll be squinting at parchment under candlelight, deciphering the latest sock shipment tally from the Rhine. Which sounds boring because it is, but it's also the glue holding an empire together, one laundry invoice at a time. You probably won't survive this. Honestly, not from gunfire or frostbite, but from terminal boredom or a tragic shelving incident involving a toppling ledger. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into your first day of duty beneath a sky the color of dishwater, in the damp chill of Paris, 1804. The war machine is already in full swing. Napoleon is emperor now, and Europe's map is starting to resemble a child's paper-folding experiment gone wrong. But you're not at Austerlitz. You're in a back alley near the Ministry of War, clutching a satchel filled with your best ink pens and a cheese sandwich wrapped in a cravat. You step into the building, old, gray, smells like mildew and bureaucracy, and are immediately swallowed by a wave of murmuring clerks. Rows of desks stretch before you like a forest of quills and crushed dreams. The air buzzes with soft scribbling and the occasional sneeze. Everyone is hunched. Everyone is pale. Everyone looks vaguely concerned about thread counts. A short man in a frock coat approaches. His name is Duclos. He smells like vinegar and lavender. "You're late," he says, even though you aren't. He points to a desk near the back, next to a window that doesn't open, and across from a man named Etienne, who will spend most of the week describing his toe fungus in unnecessary detail. Your task? The Sock Inventory Division. Officially, it's called the Département des Fournitures Régimentaires, Ligne des Chaussettes. Unofficially, it's known as the Lint Pit. You sit. The chair creaks, the desk wobbles. There's already a pile of paper waiting. Requisitions, confirmations, complaints about moisture retention, and one particularly angry note from a colonel in Lyon, demanding to know why his men received socks, clearly meant for mules. You start copying numbers, ink scratches, wax seals, scrawled initials. Each pair of socks has a life. Ordered, stitched, counted, packed, lost, found, worn, washed, maybe, and finally, reported on. You track it all. The paperwork moves like a tide, steady, unrelenting, damp around the edges. The ink gets everywhere. Your hands, your sleeves, your sandwich. You break for lunch and sit near the boiler, chewing, while reading a receipt from a garrison in Alsace requesting socks without holes, please, for once. The sarcasm bleeds through even 220 years later. Socks may sound simple, but they're everything. Without them, soldiers march in frostbitten misery. They blister, they complain, they start stealing each other's. One rogue shipment to the wrong regiment, and suddenly the cavalry's limping across the Alps in damp linens and betrayal. There's an internal ranking system here, by the way. Those who handle uniforms look down on the sock clerks. The tent managers think they're the real backbone of logistics. And the boot team? Well, they haven't spoken to anyone since the leather thickness scandal of 1803. Historians still argue whether that dispute was about actual standards or just one overly dramatic cobbler. By mid-afternoon, you've learned the codes B2 for wool, blend, F1 for full cotton, H5 for emergency hand, knit, often by nuns, with more good intentions than skill. You file 3 duplicate orders, cancel 2, and write a stern memo regarding toe seam reinforcement that no one will read. And then, the alarm rings. Well, not an alarm, more of a bell that signals an urgent dispatch has arrived. A courier from the Western Front, coat stiff with road dust, delivers a bundle. 4 soggy sheets wrapped in twine, detailing a major sock shortfall in the army near Bordeaux. They're down 12,000 pairs. Infantry morale is sliding, literally. Duclos rushes over. I need projected replacement totals for every division from La Rochelle to Bayonne by supper, he barks. Then disappears. You work until your candle gutters. Your hands cramp. You start dreaming of wool ratios. And as you drag yourself home that night, boots squelching in the Paris mud, it dawns on you. This job, this pile of socks and scrolls, might just outlast the empire itself. Napoleon may plan the battles. But you keep the army's toes dry, and you're just getting started. By your second week in the sock inventory division, you've developed a rhythm of sorts. You rise before dawn, pull on your cravat like it's battle armor, and walk the narrow streets of Paris with a tin cup of coffee sloshing in one hand and a stack of unfinished sock tallies in the other. The city's still half asleep. The air smells like chimney smoke, wet stone, and optimism diluted by rain. You're starting to understand that socks aren't just an accessory in Napoleon's world. They're a strategic asset. When troops march hundreds of kilometers, crisscrossing mountains and rivers and occasionally running headlong into Austria, their morale often hinges on the humble sock. Blistered feet, slow columns. Cold feet weaken resolve. Lost socks are like whispers of defeat. And you're now officially responsible for tracking those whispers. Each regiment submits weekly inventories. Each officer signs off with varying levels of legibility, honesty, and drama. One captain in the Italian campaign recently reported that socks evaporated during heavy combat, which, while poetic, leaves room for clarification. Another claimed excessive fog caused wool loss. You file these reports by region, regiment, and sock type. Wool, cotton, linen, blends. You even have a growing folder labeled Miscellaneous Foot Coverings, which includes one reference to experimental eel-skin hosiery, a procurement initiative that ended with screams and legal documents. Your desk is now cluttered with ink pots, candle stubs, half-eaten bread rolls, and a small mountain of order forms. These come in 2 flavors, hopeful and furious. The hopeful ones are penned neatly, requesting modest quantities with phrases like, "at your earliest convenience." The furious ones include ink blots, marginal curses, and creative threats. One general recently included a sketch of a boot kicking a stick figure labeled Logistics Staff. Your job, in theory, is to pass these requests up the chain to the ministry's supply division. But in practice, it's more like triage. You become a sock diplomat. You bundle requests from overlapping regions. You quietly adjust numbers to make mismatched shipments look intentional. You write polite cover letters with lines like, "We regret the substitution of left-footed socks for ambidextrous ones." You also start learning how socks move through the empire, from spinning wheels in Lyon to dye pots in Rouen, then carted by mule, barge, or suspiciously slow wagon to regional depots. From there, they're counted again, packed into burlap sacks, stamped with wax seals, assigned convoy numbers, and then sent toward the front. Usually, sometimes the socks vanish. Entire shipments go missing between depot and destination. You start keeping a map with pins in different colors: green for received, red for lost, yellow for still theoretically in motion. Your map is mostly yellow. Once a week, you visit the main warehouse in the outskirts of Paris. It's a cavernous, freezing place filled with crates, and more cratesum labeled, many not. You follow a foreman named Clement, who chews licorice root like it owes him money, and refers to everything as her. "This here," he says, tapping a box, "is Regiment 21's foot armor, finest wool." He cracks it open. Inside, brass buttons and 2 bonnets. He shrugs. She's fickle. Back at your desk, Etienne has started writing a serial drama. In the margins of his requisition forms a tragic tale of a missing sock named Bertrand. It's oddly compelling. You think the sock might be in love with a boot polish tin. Duclos, your supervisor, grows increasingly twitchy. He's heard that Napoleon's planning a massive troop movement eastward. That means more socks. Lots more. You're told to project regional shortfalls 3 months in advance, despite having numbers from last week that are still being verified by courier pigeon. You try anyway. You calculate that Division V is likely 3,800 pairs short, based on wear rate estimates from the Dalmatian Coast Campaign. You factor in frost risk, mud retention, and average sock theft per regiment, roughly 2.1 pairs per week, according to your very unofficial data. Historians still debate whether Napoleon understood just how precarious his army's sock situation really was. Some argue he had no patience for logistics and left it entirely to subordinates. Others believe he micromanaged down to the thread count. There's even an unconfirmed rumor that he once personally ordered a halt to a river crossing because wool must never be rushed. Whether he knew it or not, the smooth operation of his military machine depended on your numbers. Not the cannon counts, not the horse feed, not even the boots, just the socks. And somewhere along the line, you begin to take pride in it. Sure, you're tired, your eyes twitch. You now measure your days in shipments, not hours. But you've come to realize that socks make empires march. They're the first thing on, the last thing noticed when missing, and the one item every soldier complains about with feeling. So as the week winds down, and you carefully transcribe 1,200 pairs requested by a Hungarian outpost that may or may not still exist, you smile a little. Because this is history, just not the kind with trumpets. It's made of wool, lumpy, slightly damp, but yours all the same. By the time spring rolls in with its muddy boots and unsolicited pigeons, you've come to know the inside of the Ministry of Military Textiles better than your own socks, which, ironically, are both government-issued and terribly uncomfortable. You trudge into the building before sunrise now, past the same crooked lamppost, the same gendarme who never blinks, and the same puddle that's been ruining shoes since the Revolution. You step inside and breathe in the familiar scent of mildew, ash, beeswax, and a faint whiff of cabbage from someone's hidden lunch. Your office is on the 3rd floor, just high enough that the windows never open and low enough to hear every cart clatter across the cobbles outside. The walls are lined with ledgers, towering, overstuffed, leather-bound ledgers. Each one is dedicated to a specific item, regiment, or sometimes just an infamously mismanaged campaign. You work in a room with 6 other clerks, all equally pale and equally possessed of strong opinions about flax. Etienne, across from you, has now written 3 full chapters of his sock romance saga in the margins of returned requisition slips. The sock has been promoted to captain. You try not to ask questions. And at the center of it all, the master ledger. This book is sacred, massive, covered in blue calfskin that's more patch than original hide. Inside, it lists every textile supply destined for Napoleon's armies, organized by region, regiment, and phase of the moon, if the previous clerk's habits are to be believed. You are now responsible for the sock pages. Each day begins with updates, couriers delivering slips from depots, riders bringing reports from front lines, occasional scribbled complaints on linen scraps from particularly disgruntled officers. These are reviewed, sorted, stamped, and transcribed into the master ledger in neat copperplate script. You write until your hand cramps. Then you dip your pen again and keep writing. 1 full page is dedicated to Brittany's winter distribution. 4,200 pairs issued, 3,763 accounted for, 108 damaged, 329 simply vanished. Duclos mutters something about swamp attrition and scratches his chin with a ruler. You also handle incoming inventory shipments, which means examining boxes. Lots of boxes. Inside, socks. Pairs and pairs of regulation issue wool, cotton, and the occasional, experimental blend that dissolves when wet. You check for consistency, length, thickness, dye uniformity. Sometimes you weigh them. Sometimes you stretch them on calibrated wooden feet. Sometimes you stare into the box and wonder if this is what destiny looks like. A small, slightly damp hill of gray foot tubes. The ministry has dozens of departments, all tangled together like overcooked noodles. There's one for boots, one for gloves, one for undergarments. You pass their rooms occasionally. They look equally miserable. There's also an internal mail system involving small carts and overworked interns. One of them crashes into your desk at least once a week. You're still finding ink stains from the last time. In theory, all of this should run smoothly. In practice, it's organized chaos. Orders are duplicated. Numbers don't match. A warehouse near Dijon keeps sending foot wraps instead of socks, insisting it's a regional tradition. You send stern letters. They send more foot wraps. Duclos holds weekly reviews. You sit through them like a school child, quill ready, posture rigid, brain numb. Charts are unrolled. Projections are discussed. No one ever agrees on the actual definition of winter sock. One clerk tries to introduce a new filing method: vertical, stacking by urgency. The stack collapses. 3 ledgers are crushed. 2 clerks are covered in ink. The experiment is quietly buried and never spoken of again. And yet somehow, it all keeps moving. Napoleon's armies march across Europe. From Portugal to Prussia, France's soldiers stomp in time with your paperwork. Their boots may be muddy, but beneath them, you've got it covered. Historians often overlook this ministry, tucked away from the glamour of the court and the carnage of the battlefield. But without it, campaigns would stall, troops would mutiny, toes would freeze. You hear whispers from the higher floors, rumors of a massive summer offensive, more troops, more movement, and therefore more socks. Your fingers start cramping in anticipation. One day, Duclos brings in an inspector. A quiet man with gold-rimmed glasses and the unsettling habit of writing down everything you say, even when you're not talking. He observes you for hours. At one point, he asks how many socks you process per hour. You blink. You answer. He nods and leaves without explanation. 3 days later, you're given an extra ledger. Congratulations. You're now also in charge of miscellaneous reinforcements, a catch, all category that includes gloves, leggings, and something ominously listed as foot tubes, woolen, assorted. Etienne offers condolences and a half-crushed Madeleine. Still, you press on, because inside this gray building, surrounded by the scratch of quills and the sighs of men who've memorized postal routes by heart, you've found your place. You aren't a soldier. You aren't a general. But you are part of the machine. And the machine needs socks. By now, you've handled enough sock reports to dream in numbers. You see columns of figures in your sleep, lined up like marching feet. Some nights, you swear you hear a sergeant barking at a battalion of wool to hold formation. But you're not mad. You're just well acclimated to the highly specific world of sock ledgers, 1806 edition. This year's entries have a special edge. France is gearing up for something big again because, let's be honest, Napoleon always is, and the bureaucracy can feel it. Your desk is stacked with forms dated urgent, very urgent, and alarmingly, life or death, feet, related. You spend the morning cross-referencing deliveries from the Alsace depots. According to their notes, 6,240 pairs were issued to 3 regiments stationed near Strasbourg. According to the return confirmations, only 5,920 pairs were received. The remaining 320 pairs? Gone. Vanished. Possibly conscripted into a different war. You flip to the anomalies ledger and carefully log the disappearance. One more ghost sock entry for the archives. But that's not the only hiccup. A series of misaligned stamps has caused confusion across multiple departments. Apparently, someone in charge of the official approval seal misaligned the ink plate, causing the chaussure légère, validé, stamp to read chaussure légère, validé, which isn't footwear at all. It's a completely different unit of light infantry. This tiny hiccup has now rerouted 1,200 pairs of socks to a cavalry brigade that only wears tall boots. They're furious. They've sent back a letter full of boot polish fingerprints and exactly 1 sock nailed to a plank. You make a note to fix it. Tomorrow. Meanwhile, another report arrives from Lyon. It details a remarkable event. A regiment there has started conducting weekly sock counts with near religious intensity. Each soldier must display both socks in feet or in hands while an officer records their condition. The note ends with, "Morale improved, fewer fungal complaints, awaiting more ink." Duclos reads the report aloud during the weekly meeting. He doesn't laugh. "We should consider this model for all southern divisions," he says, scribbling in his notebook. Etienne, sipping lukewarm tea, murmurs, "A sock in the hand is worth 2 on the foot," and receives a respectful nod from the man who's developed early onset ledger hunch. Your main task this week is processing the second quarter sock requisitions from the Central Rhine region. It's an area known for 2 things: unpredictable weather and unusually poetic logistics officers. You receive 1 form written entirely in rhyming couplets. Our heels are bare, our toes are chilled, we march through mud, yet none were killed. A shipment lost 6 crates, no trace, restore our wool, save face with grace. You laugh. Duclos does not. The shipment in question had been loaded in Nancy and was last seen outside Metz. You track the convoy through your colored pins green, then yellow, then the dreaded red, likely intercepted, misdirected, or borrowed by opportunistic locals. It happens more than you'd think. And then comes the weekly supply inspection. The warehouse down the street sends over an inventory cart with what they claim is a standard allotment of regimental footgear. You open the first crate and stare down at what appears to be mismatched pairs, 1 short, 1 long, 1 gray, 1 suspiciously pink. You flag it immediately, write a memo, seal it with wax. The response? We use what we have. You've also taken to personal notation, adding little marks next to shipments that make you suspicious. A triangle means likely to arrive damaged. A star means officer with nice handwriting may deserve promotion. A skull means don't get your hopes up. You've got 4 skulls this week. There's a quiet satisfaction in it all, though. You watch the flow of information, the constant push and pull between need and supply, and know you're 1 thread in this massive, creaky tapestry. Historians still argue whether these detailed sock ledgers truly mattered in the grander scope of Napoleonic campaigns. Some see them as essential to the empire's logistical backbone. Others dismiss them as overblown paperwork evidence of a system already bloated beyond sustainability. You've decided that every sock matters, because they represent more than wool and stitches. They're comfort, warmth, mobility, a tiny guarantee that even as cannon fire roars, someone, somewhere, remembered the little things. You end the day double-checking figures, your eyes dry and fingers ink-streaked. Outside, Paris glows orange in the early spring dusk. Somewhere out there, a regiment waits for what you just logged. You blow on the ink, close the ledger, and stretch. Socks secured. For now. You don't notice the missing wool right away. At first, it's just a line item. Expected, 180 bales. Received, 148. You frown, make a note, and file it under pending clarification. Maybe it was a counting error. Maybe the quartermaster in Toulouse sneezed mid-entry and skipped a digit. It happens. But then the reports keep coming. From Marseille, short by 22 bales. From Tours, one wagon never arrived. From a supply post near Bayonne, our wool is gone. The wagon arrived empty except for one sock and a note that read, "Mercy." You realize you're looking at a supply chain mystery. This isn't the kind of drama that makes the history books. There are no duels, no betrayal at court, no thunderous speeches, just bales of wool brown, scratchy, bundled tight vanishing somewhere between the sheep and the sewing tables. But for the Ministry of Military Textiles, it's a crisis on par with losing an armada. You call a meeting, which, in your world, means scribbling a memo and sending it by cart to 2 other departments and Etienne, who sits across from you and has already written a fictionalized novella version of the theft entitled The Sock Thief of Bordeaux. You lay out the facts. The southern supply route has lost 54 bales over the last 6 weeks. Requisition forms and packing slips all appear in order signed, sealed, but clearly not delivered. No known road incidents, no bad weather, no outbreaks of wool-consuming livestock, and then someone mentions a rumor. A small group of men operating under assumed name Shah's been seen in the Limoges region, traveling in carts marked soap and candle goods, though never selling either. The description matches no official vendors. A peasant claims she saw one of them carrying what looked like a bundle of undyed wool under his cloak. Smelled like sheep and ambition. Duclos raises an eyebrow. "Wool smugglers?" he says, voice as flat as day, old baguette. You shrug. "It's possible." You dispatch a ride-run officially, of Corsto inquire. He returns 3 days later with a bruised knee, a soggy dispatch, and a tale involving a barn, a bribe, and a chicken that wouldn't move. The dispatch confirms what you feared. A rogue group is intercepting shipments mid-route, diverting a portion of the bales before sending the wagons on. Clean job, no violence. No delays, just theft, so smooth. Most clerks don't even realize it happened. You write a letter to the regional commander, delicately suggesting that perhaps the wagons need an additional guard. You get a reply the next week, consisting of 3 sentences and a drawing of a sheep wearing a mask. Meanwhile, the sock shortage begins to spread. Units in the south report increased foot injuries, reduced morale, and according to one melodramatic lieutenant, toes turning against their masters. You're not sure what that means, but it's clearly bad. You try to compensate. You shift available reserves from Normandy. You double-count returns and convince one depot to darn 300 existing pairs instead of waiting for new ones. You even pull a few strings and arrange for a temporary textile shipment from Belgium, which goes over about as well as offering Dutch cheese in a French tavern. Still, you keep pushing. Historians still debate whether these small logistical hiccups ever reached Napoleon's ears. Some say he was too focused on troop positions and artillery specs to care about feet. Others claim he once threw a map across the room when he heard about a glove shipment arriving late, shouting, "Are we not an empire?" Regardless, you care, because for you, each missing bale is not just material, it's one less layer between a soldier and the world's worst frostbite. It's one more blister, one more reason for a unit to march slower, fight worse, complain more. And if too many of those pile up, even the grandest army begins to unravel thread by thread. Eventually, a suspect is caught, not by soldiers, but by an innkeeper, who became suspicious after a guest asked to dry several bushels of wool by the fireplace. The man was arrested trying to pay with socks 3 pairs. All regulation issue. Stitched with the initials of a regiment stationed 200 kilometers away. You receive the report. There's no satisfaction, just a quiet nod and a new note in the margins. Wool integrity must be tracked from fleece to foot. You tighten inspection standards. You double stamp outgoing crates. You even commission a new seal with a small stern sheep on it unofficially, of course. And by month's end, the report's slow. No more vanishing bales, no more empty wagons. The South is still undersupplied, but no longer falling behind. And the soldier in Toulouse finally writes to say, "My men's socks arrived. They are coarse, ugly, and itchy. We are grateful beyond words." You sit back, rub your eyes, and smile, because that's as close to a thank you as you're going to get. There's a quiet, but enduring animosity in your life, one you didn't expect when you accepted the noble calling of sock accounting. It wears a dented tricorn hat, smells faintly of boiled onions and horse, and arrives every Tuesday morning without fail. That's right. This section is about the quartermasters, the frontline supply officers, the men who actually move the crates, and who firmly believe you and your fellow paper shufflers have no idea what you're doing. You get your first real taste of the tension when a courier arrives from Metz, clutching a muddy envelope and a scowl. Inside, a 3-page letter from a quartermaster named Brissot, opening with, "To whoever in Paris is responsible for this mess," and proceeding to explain in exquisite, increasingly furious detail how an entire regiment received socks 4 sizes too small and had to adopt a system of creative slicing. He ends the letter with a sketch. It's of a foot, wrapped in what appears to be torn strips of undershirt, labeled Plan C. You stare at the sketch, you sigh, you draft a calm, professional reply. You sign it with your best pen and file a carbon copy. 2 weeks later, he sends another letter, this time with actual socks enclosed. Half a pair, shredded beyond recognition, wrapped around a stick. The message? I rest my case. Duclos takes one look and says, "It's starting again." And indeed, it is. The annual feud between the quartermasters and the Parisian bureaucrats has a long, irritating history. They say, you hoard supplies. You say they lose half of what you send. They claim your paperwork is too slow. You point out, their reports are written in chicken scratches on greasy paper. It escalates. You receive a bundle of complaints stapled, with actual metal pins, to the tail of a taxidermied ferret. Apparently, some cavalry officers thought it a good joke. You don't laugh, mostly because it wasn't even the right forms. One quartermaster submits a sock requisition, scrawled entirely in rhyming verse. You suspect Etienne helped him, but the complaints aren't always petty. Some are heartbreakingly practical, like the captain whose unit marches through snow barefoot, wearing rags tied with twine, who asks, with worn politeness, if you can send even a half shipment. We will alternate days, he writes. Left feet Monday, right feet Tuesday. You prioritize him. You shift some deliveries from oversupplied units. You sneak in a few crates that were meant for ceremonial reserves. You don't tell Duclos. He doesn't ask. You also develop a system, a grading chart for quartermasters. If they report clearly, return packaging, and avoid sarcastic illustrations, they get bumped up in fulfillment priority. If they send angry ferrets, they get the scratchiest wool. Meanwhile, Etienne has created a wall mural made entirely of discarded complaint letters, including one that just says, "Help US," in large red letters that were, apparently, written in beet juice. Despite the bickering, both sides need each other. They know it. You know it. Without the quartermasters, all your perfect ledger entries would sit gathering dust while men marched barefoot. Without you, they'd be issuing orders on napkins and dressing wounds with hope. And, every once in a while, something remarkable happens. Cooperation. Like the time a quartermaster from Dijon sends back a detailed breakdown of sock usage rates by terrain type, complete with moisture levels, fungal risk, and estimated wear duration. It's a work of art. You copy it by hand, frame it on the wall, and send him a thank you gift, a bonus shipment of foot balm and wool, with actual stretch. Historians still argue whether this ongoing tension ever actually impaired Napoleon's supply chain. Some say the friction was productive, a kind of necessary check and balance. Others think it slowed critical shipments and contributed to those infamous mid-March miseries, especially in Russia. But within the ministry walls, you begin to realize that this love-hate relationship is what keeps the wheels turning. The shouting, the sarcasm, the passive-aggressive return label sits, all part of the process. An awkward dance of disdain and dependence. Eventually, Duclos has had enough and decides to hold a meeting, an in-person one between Paris clerks and selected frontline quartermasters. It's tense. They show up in travel-stained cloaks, boots still muddy. You meet in a stone conference room with a table too big and chairs too stiff. Someone opens with, "It would help if you labeled things, like people were going to read them." Someone else replies, "It would help if you read them." A moment of silence. Then a laugh. Then another. And the room shifts. Just slightly. You spend the day trading grievances, examples, awkward stories. One man tells you he once requisitioned 500 pairs of socks and received 500 lefts. You nod. You remember. That was your first month. By evening, agreements are made. You agree to relabel shipment types more clearly. They agree to stop drawing caricatures of Duclos as a sock with a mustache. You walk home that night with ink on your fingers, soot on your cuffs, and the memory of a meeting that almost turned into a duel but ended in shared sardines. You're tired. But you're no longer shouting into the void, because now the quartermasters shout back. And, oddly enough, that helps. Things go suspiciously quiet after the meeting with the quartermasters. Shipments start arriving on time. Reports show up with legible handwriting. One even includes punctuation. You suspect it won't last. You're right, because just when you think the sock wars have entered a peaceful phase, a new wrinkle literally emerges. Sock sabotage. It starts with an offhand complaint from a regiment near the Pyrenees. Some of the socks appear odd. You dig through the report. The language is vague, itchy in unusual ways, seams pointing in aggressive directions, and one pair dissolved in rain. You set it aside, assuming exaggeration. Then, another report arrives. And another. Over a dozen units, scattered across different regions, all describing defective socks. Some too short. Some stitched with thread that frays on contact. Some with mismatched toes, like someone had given up halfway and decided to see what chaos looked like in textile form. At first, you assume it's a bad batch. That happens. Dye lots go weird. Thread tension varies. But then you receive a parcel from a captain in the 18th Infantry. Inside, one pair of socks, carefully folded, along with a note. Observe the seam. Whoever made this hates feet. You unfold the sock. The seam runs diagonally across the sole, like a tiny woolen booby trap. You try it on. It's like walking on a tiny twisted rope. Someone is doing this on purpose. You raise the alarm quietly after all. You don't want to panic the other departments. Duclos nods gravely. "It's time we paid a visit," he says, reaching for his hat like a man preparing to storm a very sleepy fortress. You and Duclos travel across town to the contracted textile workshop that supplies a significant portion of socks to the ministry. It's in a narrow alley off Rue des Tisserands. Smells like sheep and soap. Inside, dozens of women, teenagers, and the occasional elderly man are bent over spinning wheels, knitting needles, and vats of dye. The forewoman greets you with a handshake like iron tongs and offers you tea that tastes like regret. You inspect the stock. Most of it looks fine, sturdy even. But in the corner, stacked behind a barrel of beetroot dye, you find a bundle marked Batch 62, Prussian order. You raise an eyebrow. Prussian? The forewoman frowns. "We don't fulfill Prussian orders." "Exactly." You open the bundle. Half-finished socks. Thread quality inconsistent. Stitching reversed. Wool that crumbles under pressure. Someone's been cutting corners or sabotaging product under a false pretense. It takes days of questioning, but eventually a young spinner cracks. She confesses that a former ministry contractor, recently dismissed for fraud, had bribed some workers to sneak faulty socks into shipments bound for French regiments. The false Prussian label? A cover, in case anyone checked. The motive wasn't political. It was economic. Black market resales. The dismissed contractor had started a quiet side business dealing wool, substituting cheaper materials, and funneling usable socks into private resale, while dumping defective ones into official deliveries. You report it immediately. Duclos is livid. "They're selling our soldiers socks in alley markets," he mutters, pacing like a man betrayed by fabric. The saboteur is arrested. The faulty batches are tracked, recalled, and replaced. But the damage? Already felt. One regiment reports trench foot rates doubling. Another saw desertion rates spike. A captain notes, "Morale crumbles with every step. You tighten inspection standards." Each batch now includes a bend test, a seam check, and your personal contribution, quick sniff test. Any sock that smells like glue or goat is flagged. Etienne calls it the Paris Protocol. He even designs a small rubber stamp of a suspicious eyeball that now appears on every verified shipment. Historians still argue how widespread sabotage was in Napoleon's supply chains. Some claim this was an isolated incident. Others suggest black marketeers operated throughout the empire, skimming goods and leaving soldiers with the crumbs. You don't know the full extent, but you've seen what happens when trust breaks down one pair at a time. So you work longer hours. You comb through manifests. You audit supply routes. You even show up, unannounced, at workshops with a magnifying glass and a very pointed eyebrow. And slowly, things improve. The sock complaints taper off. Reports shift from emergency to mild irritation. You even receive a letter from a regiment in Burgundy. "These new socks are excellent. Our men complain only recreationally now." A glowing review. You pen it above your desk. Because in the war for warm, intact feet, every small victory counts. Morning light creeps in through the soot-streaked windows of your cramped apartment, but you're already awake. The rooster hasn't even crowed, and still your brain is busy tallying imaginary sock bundles. You're living the life of a military textile clerk in 1809, and the job is beginning to colonize your dreams. You dress in the usual layers linen shirt, wool vest, slightly crooked cravattan sling your satchel over your shoulder, which now contains 2 ink pots, 4 half-used quills, and a hard biscuit that's probably older than some soldiers in Napoleon's army. Outside, Paris is just stirring. Bread carts roll past. A chimney sweep sings terribly. You step onto the omnibus that shudders and lurches like it resents being awake. Inside, a mix of clerks, midwives, and one man with a live goose in his lap all try not to make eye contact. You arrive at the ministry on time, but Duclos is already waiting at your desk, arms crossed, face set like curdled milk. "You misfiled 300 pairs of socks," he says. You blink. "Only 300? He doesn't laugh. Apparently, your entry for the 2nd Division's requisition had an extra 0. Instead of 600 pairs, the ledger now says 6,000, which means a warehouse in ruin is now building towers of wool, with no clear destination. One quartermaster has written to ask if a small war is being fought exclusively by feet. You sigh. You reach for the correction ink. It's going to be that kind of day. You spend the next 2 hours backtracking the error, updating distribution charts, and writing a very gentle clarification letter to the depot chief, who has already named one of the sock piles Mount Toe. After that, it's on to the return logs. Those are the reports that come in from regiments, stating how many socks made it back in one piece. It's a grim task. Many returns are marked unusable, shredded, or burned. Accidentally. One captain sends back a single, charred sock with the note, "Recovered post, cannon fire. Unlikely to retain heat." You quietly promote him in your personal rating system. The air in the ministry smells like boiled glue and stale biscuits. Etienne is scribbling furiously across a requisition slip, muttering something about sock betrayal. His fictional saga has now reached its 6th chapter, which includes a romantic subplot involving an ambitious bootlace. You break for lunch, which consists of half a turnip and a slice of cheese with aspirations beyond its means. You eat outside, near the loading dock, where shipments come and go with squeaking wheels and groaning drivers. A young courier drops a box near your feet. You pick it up. It's addressed to your department and sealed with unfamiliar wax. Inside, 3 socks and a folded note. These do not match, neither in size, color, nor moral character. Please advise. You don't know whether to laugh or salute. Back at your desk, there's a new stack of regional tallies to transcribe. Burgundy, Lorraine, the southern provinces, each with different metrics, local customs, and questionable ink. One report smells strongly of fish. Another includes sketches of marching feet, helpfully labeled before sock and after sock. You file them all, triple-checking columns, making tiny side notes in the margins. Check inventory level here. Confirm color consistency. Revisit this captain too many poetic metaphors. Because some days, you're not just logging socks. You're interpreting emotional states through fabric failure. Duclos drops by with a memo. There's a new internal initiative. All reports must now include estimated lifespan per sock type. You stare at him. How am I supposed to guess how long a sock lasts on a Polish cavalryman in spring mud? He shrugs. Make a chart. So you do. You design a chart with axes labeled fabric composition and operational terrain. You invent a rating scale from snug and smug to shattered beyond stitching. It becomes surprisingly popular. Etienne pins a copy to the break room wall. In the evening, as candles burn low and the ministry quiets down, you find yourself staring at the wall of ledgers. Row after row of volumes, each filled with tiny handwriting and numbers that meant the difference between comfort and calamity. Historians rarely mention this side of empire. The office heat, the finger cramps, the smell of mildew and melted sealing wax. But you live it, and you've started to notice how it changes you. Your eyes scan numbers for inconsistencies faster than before. You catch duplications instinctively. You no longer flinch at words like hemorrhaging inventory or critical shortage in the Pyrenees. You've even begun preemptively adjusting shipments based on weather forecasts scribbled in from local depots. You're not just filing, you're anticipating, and that's what makes the difference. Because somewhere out there, a line of weary soldiers is wading through slush and cursing the frostand when they pull on a fresh, dry pair of socks. It won't feel like a miracle, but it will be one. You stretch, dust ink off your hands, and close the day's final ledger with a satisfying thud. Not bad for someone who misfiled 300 pairs before breakfast. You didn't think filing systems could feel revolutionary. But here you are, balancing on a rickety stool in the deepest records room of the ministry, breathing in dust that predates the current regime, flipping through a ledger labeled Provisionnaire, Année 2 de la République. The date hits you year 2 of the French Republic, a full decade before you arrived here, when the revolution was still raw and idealistic, and people were figuring out how to feed and clothe armies without a king or any real clue what they were doing. You've been sent down here by Duclos, who declared over a breakfast of burnt biscuit and mild panic that it was time to revisit precedents in provisioning methods. Translation: find out if revolutionary clerks made the same mistakes you do. You wander through the maze of crumbling shelves, candle held high, dodging cobwebs and the faint, persistent smell of aged glue. Down here, it's a different world, one that whispers rather than shouts, its pages speaking in delicate script and obsolete abbreviations. You crack open a thin volume dated 1794. Inside, you find sock requisition slips from the Army of the North, filled with the desperate optimism of men inventing systems mid-March. Estimated need, 10,000 pairs. Actual in hand, 74. Someone has underlined 74 and drawn a stick figure sobbing next to it. Another entry from the Committee of Public Safety orders the confiscation of all civilian wool stockings in a 5-mile radius of Paris to meet current campaign demands. A note at the bottom reads, "Citizens deeply displeased. One uprising, minor." You smirk. Some things never change. But what truly strikes you is how these early revolutionary SO, often remembered for guillotines and pamphlets, also laid the groundwork for your very job. They built the bones of the ministry's supply structure, back when everything was still chaos, and people didn't yet realize how crucial socks could be to liberty, equality, and not freezing to death in Flanders. You find memos arguing about fabric blends, debates over standard sizing, even proposals for centralized sock-making cooperatives run by revolutionary widows. There's real idealism, here practical, thread count-based idealism, but idealism all the same. Historians still argue whether the revolutionary logistics teams were efficient or just determined. Some claim their methods were wildly inconsistent. Others say their sheer improvisational brilliance saved campaigns that otherwise should have collapsed. You begin copying some of the more interesting entries, smudging ink as you jot down phrases like Committee of Hosiery Urgencies and Emergency Toe Patching Protocol. Etienne will love this. Back upstairs, you share your findings. Duclos, rarely one to show enthusiasm, actually grunts in approval. "Maybe we're not as slow as we thought," he mutters. And suddenly, the ministry feels like more than a warehouse for numbers. It feels connected to something bigger, older, stranger. You begin to see your work as a kind of quiet inheritance passed down, not just from one clerk to another, but from regime to regime, from revolutionaries in wooden shoes to imperial foot soldiers to you, hunched over a ledger with your sleeves rolled up and your tea gone cold. There's a kind of poetry to it. The paperwork changes. The rulers change. The slogans change. But the socks? Still missing. Still miscounted. Still essential. You pass along your notes to the archives division. They add them to an increasingly dog-eared folder labeled Useful Precedents, Footwear, now thick enough to qualify as furniture. In the evenings, Etienne reads one of the revolutionary memos aloud in his best Robespierre voice. "Citizens, we must ration not only bread, but boots," he intones, then adds, "Honestly, I'd vote for this man." You laugh. Because now you see the thread pun fully intended that ties you to those long-ago scribblers with their ink-stained ideals. They cared. You care. Not because socks are glamorous, but because someone has to. The next day, you begin drafting a proposal based on your archival discoveries for standardizing seam stitching across all contracted workshops. You include diagrams, footnotes, and a section titled Liberty, Equality, Comfort. Duclos approves it on the spot. You post it with a copy of one revolutionary quote, "Let us arm the people, but let us first clothe their feet." Maybe no one will notice. Maybe no one will care. But somewhere out there, someone will march just a little farther because of it. Snow is falling in Saxony, and with it panic. It starts with a courier, naturally. They always arrive in a flurry of mud, cold, and cryptic handwriting. This one stumbles into the ministry half-frozen, boots worn through, and clutching a message from the front like it's the last chocolate in the empire. Duclos takes the note, squints at the ink, then groans. The 5th Army Corps has no socks. You blink. None? He hands you the parchment. It's short, hurried, and dire. Snow fell earlier than expected. Men have marched without adequate footgear. Spirits low. Frostbite spreading. Last known shipment unaccounted for. Urgent need. 12,000 pairs. Immediate action required. Please. There's a crude sketch of a foot at the bottom, possibly drawn with a shaking hand. You drop your biscuit. The Saxony campaign had been moving smoothly on paper. Supplies were charted weeks in advance. Routes approved, ledgers updated. But paper is dry and warm and safe. Saxony, in November? Isn't. You scramble for the manifests. Last you checked, a shipment of 15 crates was dispatched from the Strasbourg depot. You trace its path Strasbourg to Würzburg, then to Leipzig. That's where the trail goes cold. You send urgent queries to every depot along the line. You even send Etienne to the records department. He returns with soot on his nose and the grim news that 3 wagons went missing in the wooded hills near the Thuringian forest. The weather turned. The mud froze. The wagons never arrived. You stare at the map. You do the math. Without those shipments, nearly 2 divisions are marching sockless through sleet. You imagine it. Cracked leather boots, fraying linen wraps, men sharing socks like rations. You immediately draft a rush requisition. Duclos stamps it. The ministry's warehouse scrambles. Crates are pulled, counted, relabeled. You assign priority to woolen pairs, triple padded, and anything dyed dark to hide the inevitable battlefield grime. A junior clerk, wide-eyed and flustered, accidentally loads 400 gloves into the shipment. You stop him just in time. Socks, you say gently, are the feet ones. You attach a personal note to the lead crate. From Paris with urgency. May these warm your march. Check both feet. The courier departs the next morning on a fresh horse and more determination than clothing. Now comes the waiting. Historians still argue whether this crisis was the result of poor route planning, miscommunication, or sheer bad luck. Some point fingers at the regional quartermaster. Others blame impassable roads. But you know this. Every war, even the grandest, still depends on weather and wool. The following week crawls. You monitor every reply, every whisper of movement from the east. You get half answers, crossed-out names, letters that smell like smoke and fear. One reads simply, "They wrapped their feet in hay. Some say it helped." Eventually, a message arrives. Supplies received, spirits lifted, socks distributed in rotation by seniority. Cold remains, but so do we. It's not a poem. It's not a celebration. But it's a survival report. You take a moment, lean back, and stare at the soot-streaked ceiling. In a longhouse somewhere near Dresden, your crates are being opened. Men are passing out bundles, swapping stories, pulling on dry wool with sighs that don't reach your ears but somehow still echo in your bones. They might never know your name, but their feet do. Of course, not all went well. Later, you hear that 2 crates arrived soaked through, one because of a river crossing gone wrong, the other because someone forgot to patch a wagon roof. There were grumblings. There were socks re-dried over fires, and one unfortunate incident involving a goat and a misplaced bundle. But still they had socks. The army held its ground. The frostbite slowed. The march continued. Duclos drops a report on your desk a few days later. "You saved their toes," he mutters, almost impressed. Then he points at another dispatch. "Now the troops in Bohemia need mittens." You sigh. "Can't we just give them socks for their hands?" He frowns. "Don't tempt fate. You file the Saxony incident as a near miss. But in your private notebook you write, 'Victory is made of dry feet.' It's cheesy. It's true. And you underline it twice. It's one thing to get socks to the front. It's another entirely to keep them clean once they're there. The problem begins with a letter from a sanitation officer, a rare breed of military personnel who voluntarily deals with smells most men would rather duel than discuss. His handwriting is neat. His tone is defeated. Despite receiving 4,000 pairs of socks last month, we are currently down to fewer than 600 usable ones. The rest have become unserviceable. The men have taken to drying them over open flame, with predictable results. We request guidance and, if the gods are kind, more socks. You wince at the phrase, with predictable results. You've seen singed wool. It curls like despair. So begins your reluctant dive into one of the least glamorous aspects of Napoleonic warfare: laundry on the march. The official military guidance is vague. Somewhere in the 70-page instruction to campaign, there's a line about boiling undergarments, as time and firewood permit. But that's it. Everything else is left to local initiative, and let's just say that cleaning protocols are rarely enforced by Sabre. You start researching. You discover that many regiments rely on camp follower civilians who travel with the army, setting up temporary washing stations when the troops pause for more than a day. They boil water in battered pots, use wood ash as soap, and beat socks against river stones with alarming enthusiasm. It works. Occasionally. But more often, socks are washed without boiling, or dried over too much flame, or forgotten entirely, worn until they're indistinguishable from boot lining. You receive a report from a regiment near the Danube that tried using snow to freeze-scour their socks. The results were mixed, cleanish, but also stiff enough to stand upright and march themselves into battle. Then there's the matter of foot rot. Soldiers who march in wet socks, day after day, develop painful blisters, cracked skin, infections. Some try to coat their feet in animal fat. Others stuff dry moss into boots and pray. One creative lieutenant wrote to suggest a new rotating schedule. We now rotate 3 socks per 2 men. 1 worn, 1 washed, 1 drying. Morale, marginally improved. Hygiene, marginally less terrifying. You make a note. The sock triangle system. Investigate. Duclos walks by just as you're sketching a triangle labeled wet, worn, washed. He doesn't ask. He knows better now. Meanwhile, Etienne has begun compiling a glossary of soldier-reported sock scents. So far, it includes wet dog in August, boiled cabbage disappointment, and surrender. You laugh harder than you should. But the truth is, this isn't just a joke. Clean socks mean mobility. Mobility means survival. A general can plan all he likes, but if his troops are limping, the enemy wins. Historians still argue how much logistical detail Napoleon actually absorbed. Some say he once snapped at an aide for delivering casualty reports before latrine updates. Others insist he didn't care about hygiene at all, so long as his cavalry arrived before the Austrians did. Regardless, the burden falls on you, so you start drafting a proposal. It's bold. Radical, even. You suggest that each regiment be issued portable laundry kits, a canvas sack containing 2 spare pairs of socks, a bar of lye soap, and a small instruction card with diagrams. Step 1. Do not dry over open fire. Step 2. Rinse away from food stores. Step 3. Do not share unless absolutely necessary, and, even then, maybe don't. You circulate it to the ministry's hygiene subcommittee. You expect laughter. You get a budget allocation. Within a month, your kits are in production. A few weeks after that, you get your first feedback letter. Socks lasted twice as long. Fewer complaints. Soap was eaten by a horse, but otherwise effective. A second note comes from the 12th Light Infantry. We called it the Sacred Sack. One man even embroidered his. Smells better than command tent. You allow yourself a rare moment of satisfaction, because this is innovation. Not grand, not glorious, but deeply, deeply dry. Of course, there are still setbacks. A crate of kits meant for a cavalry brigade ends up with a band unit instead. Several drummers now use the soap bars as percussion instruments. Another regiment, unsure what to do with the instruction cards, nails them to trees as makeshift warning signs. Beware, laundry underway. But it spreads. Your triangle system is adopted in 5 regions. Soldiers begin logging sock rotation methods in their supply journals. One even sends you a sketch of a foot wearing 2 socks layered in reverse for warmth. He labels it, The reverse Napoleon. You're not sure what it means, but it's sincere. And in the long run, fewer socks are ruined. More are passed down. A corporal writes that he inherited a pair from a man who survived both frostbite and a French winter marriage. You think that might be the highest compliment socks can get. You file the reports. You update the charts. You close the ledger. And that night, you dream not of numbers, but of clean, dry feet marching forward, not toward glory necessarily, just toward spring, which is glory enough. It's an unspoken rule in the ministry. When Napoleon himself appears in a report, nothing good follows. You spot his name twice on a fresh dispatch from the field. You feel your stomach tighten the way it did that time you accidentally ordered 400 left socks and none for the right. But this isn't about miscounts. It's about the emperor's feet. Apparently, during the 1812 campaign into Russia, Napoleon experienced a moment of acute discomfort. The report is brief and exquisitely formal. His Majesty expressed displeasure at the state of his hosiery. Replacement pairs were deemed insufficiently insulated. Quartermaster chastised. Immediate correction ordered. There are no exclamation marks. They don't need them. When Napoleon expresses displeasure, it's implied that someone, somewhere, is about to experience sudden unemployment. You begin piecing the story together. According to follow-up letters, Napoleon had been traveling with a small, personal wardrobe minimalist, but meticulously packed. Among his personal effects, 6 pairs of socks, all hand-stitched, reinforced, and made of the empire's finest wool. Naturally, but as the march dragged on through Russian ice, even the emperor's socks couldn't survive the elements. Between icy rivers, snow-clogged boots, and 16-hour rides on half-frozen saddles, Napoleon's feet suffered. One aide reportedly found him sitting near a campfire, toasting his toes, muttering in Corsican, and glaring at a sock with visible disdain. A general offered his own pair. The emperor declined. "They smell like regret," he allegedly said. You can't confirm that quote, but it feels right. What is confirmed is that Napoleon summoned the quartermaster and demanded immediate resolution. The next day, 20 men rode in every direction, scouring villages for wool, thread, and grandmothers with nimble fingers. You find this out from a frantic report written by a man named Bellamy, who refers to himself only as Temporary Sock Director, Imperial Proximity Division. He claims to have organized an emergency knitting circle consisting of 4 elderly Polish women, 2 field surgeons, and a drummer who claimed he knew stitching from repairing drumskins. Together, they produced 6 new pairs in 24 hours. Napoleon wore one, judged it acceptable, and moved on. But the fallout was enormous. From that moment on, every officer within 20 kilometers scrambled to ensure their men's sock supply was pristine. Reports skyrocketed. Inventories doubled. The phrase, "fit for His Majesty's foot," became a minor panic-inducing slogan in requisitions from Vilnius to Smolensk. You start receiving letters with phrases like, "We beg you, send us the Emperor grade," willing to trade gloves for anything even remotely foot-adjacent. "We've lined boots with paper. Morale now smells of ink." The worst comes later, when the retreat begins, because the problem with winter is not just keeping warmits staying dry. And as the army pulled back across frozen rivers and through snow-choked forests, socks became both precious and utterly insufficient. Men froze. Socks rotted. The crates you'd sent in good faith never arrived, or were lost to weather, bandits, or collapse. One harrowing note describes soldiers using bandage strips, tent scraps, even pages of maps to wrap their feet. Another officer, clearly writing through tears or frostbite, scrawled, "We burned our boots for warmth. What remains, we tied with shirt sleeves. There are no socks, only snow." You want to look away? You don't, because even now, Your job is to document, respond, triage. You begin crafting emergency resupply paths, working with anyone who will listen: warehouse captains, postal riders, even monks with sled dogs. You invent code labels for crates: A, grade, expedited, crisis. You add tiny icons: afoot, a fire, a snowflakeito, clarify urgency. Duclos grows quieter by the day. Etienne stops writing his sock drama. Everyone understands this isn't funny anymore. One night, a courier arrives looking like death wrapped in scarf. He hands you a note from the rear guard. We salvaged 6 pairs from a downed cart. 20 men wept openly. You don't sleep that night. Historians still argue how much of the Russian disaster was due to supply failure. Some say the real cause was overreach and hubris. Others point to weather. But those who understand logistics, the ones like you, know that when 400,000 men walk into winter, the war is already half won or lost in the fabric between their toes. Eventually, the army staggers home, shrunken, shivering, shells of their former selves. And when the reports begin to arrive slow, thick, heavy, you log them. You count socks that never came back. You open crates returned unopened. You weep, quietly, over ledger's listing. Final issue, never claimed. It's not just about numbers anymore. It's about all you couldn't save. But tucked into one envelope is a scrap of parchment, folded thrice. No official seal, no rank, just a note. To the sock clerks in Paris, thank you. 1 pair made it all the way back. It's signed with a smudged thumbprint. You close the file and keep going. Elba is not what you expected. You arrive in the spring of 1814, not as a soldier, not as a politician, but as a humble logistics clerk sent by Paris to manage a much reduced, much humbled slice of what used to be an empire. You disembark with your satchel, your ledgers, and exactly 1 handwritten letter bearing the emperor's seal. It reads, "Maintain order. Maintain inventory. Above all, maintain my dignity," which is a lofty request for someone who just saw a goat eating a soldier's epaulette. Your new office is a converted bakery overlooking the sea. It smells faintly of yeast, mildew, and failure. The shelves are made from broken furniture. The ink is sun-thickened. And your desk is an upside-down door on bricks. Still, you get to work. Napoleon, despite being exiled and technically out of a job, is still very much Napoleon. He wants uniforms pressed, records pristine, boots shined, and socks? Oh yes, he still wants an inventory of every sock on the island. You begin with the basics. Elba hosts a token army, about 1,000 men, give or take those on fishing leave or involved in fruit-related bartering incidents. The supply situation is, shall we say, intimate. No sprawling depots, no frantic quartermasters, just a few crates, a few soldiers, and 1 very tired tailor named Marcellin, who has started calling you Monseigneur des Pieds. You're flattered, then mildly concerned. Your first count turns up 437 usable socks, 92 that could be persuaded, and 18 that are, in Marcellin's words, a philosophical question. One appears to be stitched from lace and twine. Another might actually be a hat. You file the numbers. Napoleon visits your office once. He doesn't knock. He simply walks in, looks around at your stacked papers and improvised storage, then nods once and says, "Good." Then he picks up a quill, signs your ledger without reading it, and leaves. You frame the page. Life on Elba is strange. Slower. You're used to the grind of Paris, the non-stop whirl of requisitions and crises. Here, the most dramatic event one week is a sheep breaking into the barracks. The soldier, it startled, requested new socks. You approved them, but that doesn't mean your work is over, because even in exile, Napoleon still prepares. There are drills, marches, uniform inspections. His men grumble less now. but still ask for better boots, more consistent rations, and socks that don't crumble like salted pastry. You manage what you can. You reroute cloth from tailors. You barter for wool with local shepherds. You even start a knitting circle with 3 elderly women who initially laughed at you, then taught you the fastest way to cast on. You're terrible at it, but it earns their respect. One day, you receive a private request from the emperor himself, handwritten. 3 new pairs, reinforced heels, subtle pattern if possible. Nothing sentimental. You deliver them personally. He accepts them without expression. Then, unexpectedly, he asks, "Do you know what I missed most in Russia?" You wait. He holds up one of the socks. Warm feet. He doesn't thank you. He doesn't need to. Historians rarely focus on Napoleon's time on Elba, and when they do, it's always about his plots, his spies, his secret plans to return. But they never mention the quiet preparation, the meticulous way he ensured every man had a full kit, every musket was oiled, every sock was accounted for. You saw it. You filed it. You made it possible. Because even in exile, even when the empire had collapsed, there was still structure, still inventory, still you. The day before Napoleon departs secretly, suddenly you receive a courier with a sealed envelope and a small parcel. Inside, a note. You kept the army clothed. That matters. Don't let the fools in Paris forget. The parcel contains a single, pristine pair of socks, dark gray, thick wool, carefully rolled. You never wear them. You keep them wrapped in paper, hidden in your satchel, marked only Elba, 1814. Back in Paris, people will call it the 100 Days. They'll talk of return, of Waterloo, of final defeat. But you? You'll remember the quiet days, the careful counts, the smell of salt and wool and sea air. You'll remember the bureaucracy that never died, and the man who, even while fallen, still demanded the right socks. Paris in 1815 is a city holding its breath. You return just before dawn, stepping off the post coach with your satchel pressed to your side and your boots coated in Elban dust. The streets are damp. The cafe shutters are still closed. And the Ministry of Military Textiles? Somehow still standing, even after being shuffled again, and renamed twice during your absence. Inside, things are a mess. The ledgers are scattered. The seals are mismatched. There are 2 versions of the same requisition form, and no one knows which is newer. Etienne is there, thank the stars, slightly thinner, slightly more paranoid, but clutching a quill like a dagger. He sees you and just says, "We lost track of everything. Please fix it." You don't ask questions, because you already know what happened. Napoleon is back. The 100 days have begun. And with them, chaos. Old regiments are being reassembled. New units are being drafted overnight. Veterans are reissued uniforms, though some are now shaped more like barrels than men. Horses are borrowed, sometimes with permission. And most importantly, there's no reliable count of anything. No one knows how many boots exist. No one knows where the tents are. And socks? No idea. Which is why, within a week, you're placed in charge of what is hastily, desperately labeled the final sock audit. You resist the urge to faint. Instead, you roll up your sleeves, take Etienne by the elbow, and dive in. First, the surviving ledgers. You identify the most recent entries from pre-Elba stockpiles. Then you cross-reference them against emergency requisitions from the last 6 weeks. Then you cross your fingers and hope basic arithmetic hasn't been abolished by decree. You find one major discrepancy right away. A warehouse near Orleans reports 400 pairs in stock. A requisition from the same depot lists 3,900 pairs last of stock. So, did 1,500 socks evaporate? Were they miscounted? Were they eaten? You check the margins. A faint note reads, "Possible double Bachon conscript wrote with wine." You mark it for re-verification and keep going. You also track the returns. Thousands of old socks come limping home, tattered from previous campaigns, worn by the ghosts of battles past. Some are redarned, some are burned. Some are sorted by usefulness. Left intact, right intact, neither. You oversee the repackaging of all that can be salvaged. And then, you begin issuing them again. You set up a temporary distribution center in the courtyard of the old warehouse, the one with the half-collapsed roof and the pigeon problem. Soldiers line up with their gear tags. You personally hand them new socks. Some thank you. Most don't. One cries. Duclos reappears midweek, pale and moving like a man who slept in a ledger closet for 6 months. He grunts a hello and drops a crate labeled Northern Dispatch, Urgent. Inside are reports from Belgium. You already know what's coming. The words blur as you read them. Supplies insufficient. Terrain marshy. Boots failing. We need socks. Immediately, it's June. It's raining. And the Battle of Waterloo is days away. You do what you can. You pull every last usable pair from your remaining stock. You divert shipments meant for Parisian garrisons and send them north. You beg the ministry's transport director to push the carts through the night. He agrees, but only because you promise him your cheese ration for the next month. And when you've done all you can, you sit, you breathe, you wait. Then the news comes. Waterloo, not a victory. And, in its wake, chaos again. Napoleon abdicates. Again. And this time, there's no Elba waiting. Only a boat. Only St. Helena. Only the long, slow undoing of everything you've spent years holding together. Within days, the ministry is stripped bare. Ledgers are boxed. Seals are changed. You're told to halt all outgoing shipments. You're handed a form labeled Liquidation of Auxiliary Textile Divisions. You stare at it. Then you file it, because that's what you do. The final sock audit is concluded one damp Wednesday morning. You count the last crate. 103 pairs. Mostly intact. One with an embroidered star on the heel, initials unknown. You log them all. Every last one. Historians will go on to chronicle the downfall of the empire. The treaties, the battles, the return of kings. But you'll remember the crates, the stacks, the lists, the quiet work behind the loud events. And in one final act of archival defiance, you write in the last ledger, sock situation, resolved, feet tired, hearts uncertain, quills dry. Then you cap your ink bottle, blow out the candle, and walk home under a sky that doesn't care who ruled France yesterday. The ministry no longer feels like a ministry. It's quieter now, emptied of its urgency, stripped of its purpose. The desks are mostly bare. The inkwells are dry. And even Duclos has taken to wearing his dressing gown to work, muttering things like, "What is requisition if not a metaphor for longing?" You still show up. Out of habit more than duty. Your title technically remains, but the uniforms have stopped coming. The armies are disbanded. Napoleon is gone for real this time. And the socks? They're just socks again. But that doesn't mean the work is done, because with the empire collapsed, the archives must be sorted. And who better to untangle over a decade of frantic, inconsistent, often poetic paperwork than youth person who once invented a sock classification triangle in a moment of desperation and glory? So, you begin. You start with the old ledgers. Page after page of numbers and names and angry letters from frozen men. You scan for duplicates. You annotate notes like, "Missing crate?" with updates. Found in 1813 behind Pigeon Loft. You open packages. Long forgotten orders. Delayed so long, the intended recipients are probably farming now. In one envelope, a requisition for lavender-scented sock sachets for an officer's quarters. You smile and file it under aspirational requests, never fulfilled. Etienne visits sometimes. He's left the ministry to teach handwriting to orphans, but he brings pastries and updates on the sock romance saga, which now includes a dramatic courtroom scene and a surprise twin. You pretend not to care, but ask for a summary when he forgets to leave a chapter. Your favorite day of the week is Thursday. That's when a man from the Musée de l'Arme stops by, dusty spectacles and all, asking about military footgear procurement records. You beam, you pull out boxes, you show him the handwritten chart you made during the Saxony crisis. He takes notes with reverence usually reserved for ancient swords. Historians still argue whether your department mattered. Some claim the whole military textile division was bloated, inefficient, laughable. Others point to the consistency of supply lines, the discipline of uniform distribution, the astonishingly low rate of barefootedness across the empire. You don't argue either way. You just know what you saw. You remember the 12,000 socks rushed to the Danube, the boot polish fingerprints, the shredded returns from Russia, the old man on Elba who embroidered every pair with his initials so he'd die fashionable. You remember the goat that stole 2 lefts, the monk who delivered a crate on a sled in the middle of spring, the officer who cried into your hands when you gave him a second pair. You remember the feet, tired, blistered, cold, triumphant, and the people who kept them moving. You compile your final project, a record of the forgotten. It includes every clerk who worked beside you, a list of all known sock types issued during the Napoleonic Wars, a footnote explaining the difference between emergency toe reinforcement and a stitched insult. You add your initials, you seal it in wax, you place it in the archives. Then you take one last walk through the hall-stapping old desk corners, running your fingers over faded names, whispering, "Thank you," to the long-gone ghosts of bureaucracy. At your desk, you leave a note. Inventory complete. Everything else? Pending. And then you leave. The room is empty now. Outside, the world turns slowly. Cobblestones cool in the evening breeze. Somewhere, a boy ties a cloth around his foot, unaware he's echoing centuries of soldiers, of marchers, of lives woven into wool. You sit quietly, the last page turned, the last name filed, the last inkwell dried. It's strange how small things numbers in a ledger, a crease in a seam, a pair of socks rolled with care can, carry so much weight. How entire armies stood and fell, not just on strategy or gunpowder, but on comfort, on warmth, on dry toes. And behind that, you, not the hero, not the general, just the quiet one with a quill and a creaky chair, making sure the count was right, that the crates were full, that the soldiers, tired and muddy and half scared, had one small thing they could count on. You did that, and now, it's over. The battles are done. The boots are stored. The ledgers are closed. And all that's left is this soft silence, this gentle knowledge that for a time, in your own quiet way, you held the line. So breathe in. Let your shoulders drop. The story is done. The socks are counted. The empire is gone. But you did the work. Now, rest.